Now, welcome back to Calling It. I'm Ed Calls. So, the international fixtures have been quite boring, to say the least, and it's given me a bit of time to go through Celtic's team, Celtic squad, and have a considered look at sort of the depth chart in each position, what the best formation might be for Neil Lennon to play going forward, and some changes that he could make that might kickstart these players and get them to play a little bit better than they have. It isn't panic station so far. The European disappointment has put a bit of a damper on the season, but they still have the 10 in a row to fight for, and they have a long way to go. So the depth chart going forward for Celtic's team. So in goals, we have Scott Bain as the backup to Barkas. Barkas is clearly going to be the starter, but Scott Bain might come in for a couple of games in the Cup. At right back, we only really have two key options. That's Jeremy Frimpong and El Ahmed. El Ahmed defensively, I thought he was a little bit better than Frimpong, but the European disappointment, the goal was his fault. Defensively, he was poor for that, so it's hard to know where he's really at. I do think Jeremy Frimpong is the better option in any formation for Neil Lennon, really, because he's better on the ball, he's quicker, he gets up and down. Defensively, yes, he can be a little bit lax, but he uses his pace to get up and down the pitch, and he can make up for any mistakes that he makes by using his pace. And if he can get his dead ball delivery, his end game a little bit better than what it is, then he can be a real good player for Celtic going forward. So I do think he's the best option we have at right back. At centre back, you have Christopher Ayer, you have Shane Duffy now coming in from Brighton, and you have Chris Julian. I do think you can fit all three of those into the team, but if I'm going ranking the defenders from a defensive point of view, Shane Duffy is the best defender in that team. He's good in the air, good defensively, but he lacks a little bit of pace and lacks a little bit of composure on the ball. So the likes of Christopher Ayer, I would say, is best on the ball, but Chris Julian is the best when it comes to being the best of both worlds. He's good on the ball and he's good defensively, so I do think he's the second best option. And then Christopher Ayer is probably at the bottom of the list when it comes to centre backs, when it comes to pure defensive attributes. At left back, they have Greg Taylor and Bolingoli and potentially Michel Bakker coming in from PSG. That deal looks to be a little bit in the air at the minute, but if they can get that over the line, he'll be a brilliant signing. Greg Taylor is obviously the only option we have at the minute because Bolingoli and his Spanish trip has kind of ruled him out for the rest of the season. I would say I can't imagine him coming back into the team anytime soon. As long as Greg Taylor's fit, I can't see Bolingoli being an option for Neil Lennon going forward, especially the way they're talking about him. So Greg Taylor is there. He's fine. I do feel a little bit sorry for Greg Taylor because he is not really up to the standard of Celtic. He's a good player, but he's coming under really strong criticism from some fronts at Celtic. He is doing his best. It's not a criticism of his drive and want to play for Celtic and his want to win at Celtic. It's just that he might just fall a little bit short of the ability needed at left back. Centre midfield is definitely the most packed place for Celtic at the minute. You got Beaton, Brown, Christie. I do still consider Tom Rogic a Celtic player until he moves. David Turnbull, Callum McGregor, Olivier Ncham, El Yunusi, Mikey Johnson once he's fit again, and James Forrest. That is a really packed midfield, and it's really about which of those combinations can we get into that will best suit Celtic going forward. And defensively, Brown, his legs are getting less and less quick. His passing is getting less and less sharp. He has been the captain for many, many years now, so I'm not going to criticise him for what he's done, but going forward, Celtic need to start blooding a new player in centre midfield because he's not going to be the guy who's going to lead Celtic going forward after this year. He just doesn't have the legs to do that. Near Beaton, you can almost consider him as part of a centre back as well because that's pretty much where he's been playing over the last year or so. He hasn't really been playing centre defensive midfield. Callum McGregor is a great option to have. I do like to see him getting forward a little bit more. I think he's a little bit shackled by the defensive midfield position that he's been playing in over the last year or so under Neil Lennon. I do think he's got some good attributes going forward as well, and he can really pick out that pass that can unlock teams like he did a few weeks ago for Celtic. Tom Rogic is an interesting one until he's actually gone out of the club. I think he's a great option. He's brilliant on the ball. He's creative. He can pick out the pass when he needs to, and he can also beat players as well. He's a little bit slow, but apart from that, I think he's a brilliant player. And then you've got Olivier Ncham is an excellent player if he can get consistency. Then David Turnbull has come in. I would like to see a bit of him going forward for Celtic. I do think he's a great player. He's going to be very, very important for Celtic going forward. Ryan Christie again, if he can pick his form up, he's been playing as a sort of a striker role since Edouard was out injured. So he's versatile. He can pick out this pass, but sometimes he can be a little bit frustrating when he takes too much out of the play and loses the ball. El Younousi is a quality player. He's more of a left winger for us than a centre midfielder or even a midfielder at all. So I think that we can utilise his position a little bit better. James Forrest, frustrating over the last couple of years. He can be frustrating anyway, but he can also be excellent. So I do think while he's come under criticism, he will be important for Celtic going forward because he is going to play under Neil Lennon. If he can sort out his end game, he's kind of one of those wingers. He's a typical winger that he's really good on his strong foot, but if you put him onto his left foot, he struggles. If you remember Aidan McGeady for Celtic, I'm not saying James Forrest is up to the standard of Aidan McGeady because he's not, but the main frustration with Aidan McGeady was he could beat about 9 or 10 players, but then his end game, he could scuff his cross into the first man. That's sort of where James Forrest is at the minute. So if he can sort that out, he's good at finishing. If he can get his crossing better, he can be a really important player for Celtic going forward. So I do think he's a good player to have in your squad. And plus, he's a local lad. He knows what it means. And I don't think he can ever really criticise his desire or his drive for Celtic. So I do think he's a good player to have in the squad. And a striker, probably struggling a little bit. Edouard out injured over the last couple of weeks. He did play for France, so I don't know if that calf strain that he's apparently struggling with doesn't count for a country, but hasn't been playing for Celtic. So it's a worrying time if he's out the door because the depth chart, that's where Celtic start to fall down. You've got Lee Griffiths, who I don't know if he's going to be playing again for Celtic this year due to the behind the scenes arguments with Neil Lennon. Klimala, he hasn't managed to get fit since January, so he's obviously not in Neil Lennon's plans. And then you have Ayeti, who is getting better, he is getting fitter, and does look like he's going to be a good option up front if he's going to be starting for Celtic if Edouard leaves, which he probably will be starting if Edouard does leave. But I still don't think he's good enough to replace Edouard because, let's face it, Edouard has been Celtic's best player, probably most talented player since Larsson to be at the club. So if he leaves, that's going to leave a massive hole. There are a couple of potential lineups that Neil Lennon will go for. If you go for a 4-3-3, I think if you look at the depth chart, so this is what I would go for if he's going for a 4-3-3. Barkas in goal, automatic starter. A right back, like I said, I think Jeremy Frimpong is the best option here. El Amade is a good option to have as a backup, but I think Frimpong offers a bit more going forward. Then across the middle, you have Chris Julian and Shane Duffy. I think that's a really good partnership to have in a back four. If you're going for that, Julian has a little bit of pace. Duffy is lacking in pace, but what he lacks in pace, he makes up for in strength, in aerial ability, and an ability just to stop strikers from getting him on the turn. So he's a good option to have there. I do think Christopher Ayer, I've nothing against him personally, but I just don't think if he's not fully committed to the club, if he's still trying to push a move, that could be an agent doing that as well. So I don't want to say it's Christopher Ayer doing it. Could be his agent trying to force a move. So if he does want to force a move, then I think Shane Duffy, who wants to be here, he's a Celtic fan, should be starting there. And Greg Taylor is going to be the left back. Centre defensive midfield, you're looking at a partnership of Scott Brown and McGregor. I do think Brown has enough in him for the next few months, but I don't think he's an automatic starter. If he's not playing well, then he shouldn't be an automatic starter. If you're replacing him in this 4-3-3, I would put Nir Beaton as a defensive midfielder, just because I don't think Cal McGregor provides that defensive solidity as a centre defensive midfielder to make up for what Brown does. So I'd have Nir Beaton in beside him. If Brown isn't starting beside him, then as the number 10 in the midfield, I would have Olivier Ncham. I just think he's a little bit more creative and a little bit better on the ball, and his passing is a little bit sharper than Christie's. He does have a good shot from outside of the box as well, so he's a good option to have there. When you're looking at the sort of depth chart, then if he's not playing, I think Christie's probably the best option to have as that number 10, followed by Tom Rogic and followed by David Turnbull. That may change over the course of the season if Rogic leaves the club and if David Turnbull plays and impresses. So the jury is still out on Turnbull. I do think he's a great option to have there, but I don't think he can he hasn't done enough, or he hasn't got the chance, but he hasn't shown in a Celtic shirt that he can live up to the expectations at this club. And it's a lot different coming into the club as a good player, but when you have the expectations and the pressures of playing for Celtic at this level, he hasn't proven that he can handle that yet. So if he comes in and impresses, I do think he's a great player to have there. Good option at number 10. On the right wing, I have James Forrest. I do think he is a good player. I do think he's a good winger, and he does provide a little bit of shape when it comes to having that 4-3-3. He is an out-and-out winger, especially the fact that the left wing, who I have El Yunusi in there, likes to cut in, likes to come in and narrow the game. So it's good to have James Forrest at the back post to get onto any crosses or to get crosses into the box. And then obviously Edouard is the best option in the middle, followed by Ayeti, Griffith, and Klimala isn't in my plans at all because, I mean, is he in anybody's plans at this stage? On the left wing, I do think you can play Mikey Johnson there. When he's back fit, he was quite good last year, so he's a good option to have there. Is he good enough for this standard? This is the season we can really tell that. And if Chris Forrest isn't playing, I think it's a situation where you push Christie onto that right wing and you bring in Rogic or Turnbull as that number 10 if Incham isn't playing. But I do think Incham should be starting in a 4-3-3. You could go 3-5-2, which the difference between the 4-3-3 and the 3-5-2 is that you probably fit more of your better players into the 3-5-2, but you are sort of pinholing them into a position that they may not be 100% comfortable with. So 3-5-2, the starting team that I would go for in that formation is Barkas in goal. Then you have a 3 partnership of Julian on the right, Shane Duffy in the middle, and Christopher Ayer as the left-sided centre-back, with Jeremy Frimpong and probably El Yunusi as the left wing-back. That's one of the issues that you're going to have, is that if you're dropping Greg Taylor, who comes in for them, the depth chart is really shallow there for Celtic. So where do you actually put them? El Yunusi is probably the best option to have at left wing back at the minute, unless they can get Bakker in from PSG. So the back 3, the issues there would be defensively, they'd be actually solid, but if one of those get injured, it's only Near Beaton that can come in and replace a centre back if one of the 3 get injured. El Ahmed doesn't really fit in as a right wing back. I think Jeremy Frimpong is an absolute automatic starter if it's a 3-5-2 formation. And then in midfield, this is where I think Brown would drop out of the team. I do think Cal McGregor and Incham could do the middle of midfield by themselves in a 3-5-2, and then you have Ryan Christie as the number 10. Again, Rogic, Turnbull are good options to have in that number 10 as well. If McGregor drops out, you have Brown to come in. If Incham drops in, you have Beaton as well. So you have options there if you're playing an extra man in midfield, because Celtic's depth chart is so deep at midfield. This is probably the best option. Then up front, you have Ayeti and Edouard is your best options. But again, this is where you can start getting creative. You could put, instead of Ayeti there, you could put El Yunusi, you could put Forrest, you could put Christie, you could put Johnson. These are the options that Neil Lennon will have if he plays a 3-5-2. If he played Greg Taylor at left back, then El Yunusi is a good player to have there, because he doesn't like to get narrow anyway. So he's a good option to have there if they're playing a 3-5-2. And then Christie also has experience playing there now because he played up front by himself. So that position might actually suit him as a sort of false 9 in a 3-5-2 formation for Celtic. So I think the 3-5-2 option opens up different realms of possibilities for Celtic when it comes to their starting lineup. And I do think the depth chart is just a little bit deeper in midfield, so why not play an extra midfielder when that is your strength? 4-3-3, you do have the defensive solidity there with a 4 at the back and Brown and McGregor sweeping up. But going forward, I do think the 3-5-2 opens it up a little bit better and just gives you an opportunity to get your better players on the pitch, because ultimately that's what you want. You want all of your best players on the pitch at the main point in time, get them into the starting lineup, and then if they're playing out of position, then you sort that out on the pitch. That's the only issue with the 3-5-2. The likes of Incham is playing a little bit deeper than he would be in a 4-3-3. The likes of Christie might have to fill in as a a false 9, or the likes of Eunice might have to drop a little bit deeper as a left wing back, but it does open up the options to get all 3 of your best defenders in the pitch, 3 of your best midfielders in the pitch, and then have 2 attacking options up front as opposed to Edouard being up there by himself. And also, if Edouard leaves the club or gets injured, you still have 2 up front with Ayeti, if Griffith can come back in, or Christie, Forrest, Johnson, El Younousi can all play there. So I think that opens up a little bit more options for Neil Lennon going forward. What do you think? Do you think that we should be playing a 4-3-3? Should Celtic be playing 3-5-2? Is there a different formation? What sort of lineup would you go for? Who do you think should be starting? Who do you think should drop out of the team going forward? We are going back into a very important part of the season, so how do you think Celtic will get on? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm Enda Call. This has been Calling It. Thanks for watching.